War is more than battles fought on maps. It is a living force that reshapes the world, leaving behind legacies that echo through generations. Today, we take you on a journey through two of the most transformative conflicts in human history: World War II and the Vietnam War. These wars were not just struggles of armies. They were crucibles of ideology, power, and the unyielding resilience of the human spirit. In this video, we will dive deep into the strategies, sacrifices, and stories that defined these monumental events and forever altered the course of history. World War II, a global conflict fought across continents, witnessed the rise of unparalleled leadership, revolutionary tactics, and technological innovations that changed the face of warfare. From the fierce resistance of the Allies against the Axis powers to pivotal moments like the Normandy landings and the Battle of Stalingrad, the stories of bravery and sacrifice are as inspiring as they are harrowing. It was a time when the fate of the world hung by a thread, and ordinary people rose to extraordinary heights to defend freedom and justice. On the other side, the Vietnam War was a conflict unlike any other. A battle of ideologies played out in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, where guerrilla warfare clashed with conventional military might. It was a war that challenged traditional notions of victory, exposing the raw complexities of politics, culture, and human perseverance. The stories of soldiers navigating treacherous terrain, the strategies that shaped the battlefield, and the voices of those affected by the war offer a deeply human perspective on one of the most controversial wars in modern history. But this video isn't just about the big moments you've read about in history books. It's about the untold stories of soldiers who defied the odds, leaders who made impossible choices, and everyday people caught in the chaos of war. It's about understanding what these wars meant not only for the nations involved but for the people who lived through them, often at unimaginable cost. We'll explore the key strategies that defined victory and defeat, from the coordinated assaults of D-Day to the stealth and endurance of the Viet Cong. We'll uncover how these wars reshaped alliances, redrew borders, and influenced cultures worldwide. And along the way, we'll shine a light on the human cost, sacrifices etched into history that remind us of the true weight of war. This is not just a recounting of events, it's a chance to connect with the heartbeat of history, to walk in the footsteps of those who endured the unendurable, and to witness the defining moments that shaped our world today. So, if you've ever wondered how these wars unfolded and why their stories still matter, you've come to the right place. Buckle up, because this journey will take you into the heart of history, revealing the triumphs, tragedies, and enduring lessons of World War II and the Vietnam War. Let's begin. The story of World War II begins long before the first shot was fired. It starts in the aftermath of World War I, where the Treaty of Versailles imposed crushing reparations and restrictions on Germany. A nation humiliated and struggling to rebuild became fertile ground for Adolf Hitler's rise to power. His vision of a resurgent Germany, fueled by propaganda and a narrative of revenge, captivated a nation desperate for hope. But the seeds of war were not sown in Germany alone. Across the globe, Japan sought to expand its empire, believing its destiny lay in dominating Asia and the Pacific. Italy, under Mussolini, dreamed of restoring the grandeur of the Roman Empire. As the Great Depression swept across the world, economic hardship stoked the flames of nationalism and extremism. The League of Nations, designed to prevent future conflicts, proved powerless against the growing aggression. Japan's invasion of Manchuria, Italy's conquest of Ethiopia, and Germany's reoccupation of the Rhineland all went unchecked. The policy of appeasement, epitomized by the Munich Agreement, sought to avoid another global conflict but instead emboldened aggressors. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's infamous declaration of "peace for our time" after conceding Czechoslovakia to Hitler became a tragic symbol of misjudged diplomacy. The world stood on the brink of chaos, yet few could foresee the scale of the storm that was about to engulf humanity. The Battle of Stalingrad was not just a clash of armies but a struggle for the soul of a nation. Hitler's obsession with taking the city that bore Stalin's name turned Stalingrad into a living hell. Bombs rained down, reducing the city to rubble, yet the Soviets refused to yield. Every street, every building became a battlefield, with soldiers and civilians fighting side by side in brutal urban warfare. Stalin ordered a defense to the death, while German forces found themselves trapped by the biting cold and relentless Soviet counterattacks. The encirclement of the German Sixth Army was a masterstroke of strategy, cutting off over 300,000 troops from supplies and reinforcements. Inside the pocket, German soldiers faced starvation, frostbite, and the unrelenting Soviet onslaught. For the Soviets, the victory came at an immense cost, with over 1 million casualties. Stalingrad became the graveyard of Hitler's ambitions in the East and marked a decisive turning point in the war. The personal accounts of soldiers, filled with courage and despair, reveal the true cost of one of history's deadliest battles. When dawn broke on June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy were shrouded in mist, masking the beginning of the largest amphibious assault in history. The Allies had spent months planning and preparing for Operation Overlord, a bold bid to liberate Western Europe from Nazi control. Every detail had been considered, from deceptive operations to mislead the enemy to the meticulous coordination of air, sea, and land forces. As Allied troops stormed the beaches, they faced a hail of bullets, mines, and barbed wire. The chaos was unimaginable, yet amidst the carnage, countless acts of heroism emerged. Soldiers braved enemy fire to rescue wounded comrades, demolish obstacles, and secure the beachheads. Paratroopers landed behind enemy lines, sowing confusion among German forces and cutting off reinforcements. The success of D-Day was not guaranteed, but the determination of the Allied forces turned the tide. By nightfall, the beaches were secured, paving the way for the liberation of France. Normandy was more than a battle. It was a testament to the courage, ingenuity, and resolve of those who fought to free a continent. Thousands of miles from Europe, the Pacific theater witnessed its own turning point at the Battle of Midway. The Japanese fleet, seeking to lure the U.S. Navy into a trap, found themselves outmaneuvered thanks to American codebreakers who had cracked their communications. Armed with this vital intelligence, Admiral Chester Nimitz orchestrated a daring ambush that caught Japan off guard. The skies above Midway became a battleground as dive bombers targeted Japanese carriers, turning them into infernos. The loss of 4 Japanese carriers marked a devastating blow to Japan's naval power, shifting the balance in the Pacific. Midway was not just a victory of firepower but of strategy and ingenuity, demonstrating the critical role of intelligence in modern warfare. It was a moment that turned the tide of the war and set the stage for the long and bloody island-hopping campaign that would follow. The final chapter of World War II in Europe unfolded in Berlin, a city consumed by chaos and destruction. Soviet forces, numbering in the millions, launched a ferocious assault on the German capital. Hitler's once mighty Third Reich was reduced to a crumbling fortress, defended by ragtag forces of soldiers, old men, and even children. As Soviet tanks rolled through the streets, the battle turned into a brutal melee of house-to-house combat. Civilians, caught in the crossfire, endured unimaginable suffering, their city reduced to rubble. In his bunker, Adolf Hitler faced the inevitable, choosing suicide over surrender. When the Soviet flag was raised over the Reichstag, it marked not just the end of the war in Europe but the collapse of a regime that had plunged the world into darkness. While the major battles often dominate the narrative, the lesser-known stories of World War II reveal the depth and complexity of the conflict. Across occupied Europe, resistance movements waged a relentless fight against tyranny. From the French Maquis to the Polish underground, ordinary men and women risked everything to sabotage the enemy and aid Allied forces. Their courage in the face of unimaginable danger remains an enduring testament to the human spirit. Colonial troops, drawn from across the British Empire, the French colonies and beyond, played crucial roles in the war effort. From the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of Southeast Asia, these soldiers fought valiantly, often in the shadows of history. Women, too, stepped into roles that defied societal norms, serving as spies, medics, and factory workers, ensuring the war machine kept turning. But for many, the war brought tragedy and displacement. Internment camps, forced migrations, and the horrors of genocide scarred countless lives. These stories, though often overshadowed by the grand narratives of strategy and victory, are essential to understanding the true impact of World War II, a conflict that reshaped not only nations but the very fabric of humanity. The Vietnam War didn't just begin in 1965 with the United States military escalation. It has deep roots stretching back to the early 20th century. The struggle for Vietnam's independence was ignited by a century of French colonial rule, under which the Vietnamese people suffered harsh exploitation. From the moment French colonial forces established their grip over Indochina, the Vietnamese began to resist. The most prominent figure in this resistance was Ho Chi Minh, who would become the face of the revolutionary movement. Ho Chi Minh, having studied abroad, was deeply influenced by Marxism and communism, ideas that would guide the fight for a free Vietnam. The First Indochina War, which lasted from 1946 to 1954, saw Ho's Viet Minh forces clash with the French. Despite being outgunned and under-resourced, the Viet Minh's guerrilla warfare tactics and unwavering determination led to the pivotal French defeat at Dien Bien Phu, a moment that would forever change the trajectory of Vietnam's future. In 1954, after the French withdrawal, the Geneva Accords divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel, creating 2 distinct entities: North Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh and his communist government, and South Vietnam, led by President Ngo Dinh Diem, who had the backing of the United States. This division set the stage for the ideological and physical conflict that would ensue. The Cold War, which pitted the capitalist United States against the communist Soviet Union, shaped the politics of the region. America's fear of the spread of communism in Southeast Asia led to the implementation of the domino theory, which argued that if one country fell to communism, neighboring countries would follow. This theory would justify the US escalation into Vietnam and set the stage for the war. For the US, this conflict became not just a fight for Vietnam's future, but part of the larger struggle between communism and democracy that defined the Cold War era. By 1965, the Vietnam War had escalated beyond the bounds of conventional warfare. The United States launched Operation Rolling Thunder, a massive bombing campaign intended to break North Vietnam's resolve and force them to the negotiating table. For months, waves of American bombers rained down on North Vietnam, targeting military installations, transportation routes, and even civilian infrastructure in a bid to cripple the enemy's war effort. The goal was simple: destroy North Vietnam's supply lines, its ability to wage war, and break its morale. But this approach failed to bring the desired result. Instead of submitting, the North Vietnamese dug in deeper, becoming more determined to continue the fight. Rather than crippling their enemy, the bombing campaign only strengthened the resolve of the North, furthering their belief in their fight for independence. The strategy backfired, causing massive civilian casualties, damaging homes and villages, and creating a growing moral dilemma for American forces. Instead of defeating the North, Operation Rolling Thunder turned into a symbol of the futility of the war. No matter how much America bombed, Vietnam would not relent. Then, in January 1968, came the Tet Offensive, one of the most shocking and pivotal events in the Vietnam War. During the Vietnamese New Year celebration, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched a surprise attack on major South Vietnamese cities, including Saigon and Hue. While the North Vietnamese were tactically defeated, the offensive was a strategic success. The assault shattered the American public's perception of the war and revealed the deep divide between what officials in Washington claimed was happening and the reality on the ground. On television screens across the United States, Americans saw the U.S. Embassy in Saigon under siege and urban combat in the heart of South Vietnam. The offensive laid bare the depth of the conflict and called into question the U.S. government's claims that victory was just around the corner. The shockwaves from Tet were felt across the nation, and the American public's support for the war began to crumble. What was meant to be a celebratory period instead became a stark reminder of the war's brutal reality and its high cost. Perhaps one of the darkest chapters of the Vietnam War was the My Lai massacre in 1968. A platoon of U.S. soldiers, frustrated by the long and brutal nature of the conflict, massacred over 500 unarmed South Vietnamese civilians, mostly women, children, and elderly, suspected of being Viet Cong sympathizers. The My Lai massacre is one of the most horrifying examples of the dehumanizing effects of war. It was a moment that exposed the moral quagmire of the U.S. military presence in Vietnam. The massacre was initially covered up, but when it was revealed to the public, it caused a wave of outrage both in Vietnam and at home. The atrocity became a powerful symbol of the horrors of war and significantly weakened the moral authority of the United States. It became a rallying cry for the anti-war movement, as people began to question the very ethics of American involvement in Vietnam. My Lai was a dark moment that highlighted the ugly, often brutal nature of war and the psychological toll it took on soldiers and civilians alike. The war, which had spanned almost 2 decades, finally came to an end on April 30, 1975, when North Vietnamese tanks rolled into Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam. The fall of Saigon marked not just the defeat of South Vietnam, but the failure of the United States to achieve its objectives. As the North Vietnamese forces captured the city, American helicopters scrambled to evacuate U.S. personnel and those South Vietnamese citizens who had worked with the Americans. The sight of helicopters lifting off from the embassy roof in the final moments of the American presence in Vietnam became one of the most iconic images of the war. For the South Vietnamese, it was a bitter defeat and the beginning of a new chapter under communist rule. For Americans, it marked the painful reality that the war had been for nothing. The stories of those who fled in the chaos of the fall, and those who stayed to face the consequences, were filled with heartbreak and trauma. The fall of Saigon was not just a military defeat, it was a symbol of a failed foreign policy and a bitter end to a war that cost over 58,000 American lives and millions of Vietnamese lives. Amid the battles, operations, and military strategies, the human cost of the Vietnam War is perhaps its most enduring legacy. This was a war that affected the lives of countless individuals: soldiers, civilians, families, and journalists, each with their own stories of hardship, bravery, and sacrifice. The personal accounts of soldiers on both sides tell of the brutality of jungle warfare, the constant fear of death, and the psychological toll that the war exacted. Many soldiers returned home broken, struggling with PTSD and the emotional scars of the horrors they had witnessed. For the Vietnamese civilians caught in the crossfire, the war meant displacement, devastation, and destruction of their communities. Entire villages were bombed, families torn apart, and survivors were left to rebuild their shattered lives in the aftermath. The Vietnam War also had a profound cultural impact, influencing music, literature, and cinema in ways that still resonate today. Anti-war protests, fueled by the disillusionment with the war's cost, inspired a generation of artists, musicians, and writers to use their craft to speak out against the conflict. Songs like Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival became anthems for the growing anti-war movement, while movies like Platoon and Apocalypse Now depicted the chaos and confusion of the war. These cultural works helped shape public opinion and challenged the narrative that the war was a noble cause. Looking back, the Vietnam War teaches us crucial lessons about the dangers of unchecked military intervention, the importance of understanding the culture and politics of the countries we engage with, and the long-term human consequences of war. It shows us that no conflict is ever as simple as it seems, and that the price of war is measured not just in lives lost, but in the lasting emotional, cultural, and psychological scars it leaves on the people involved. As we reflect on the monumental conflicts of the 20th century, from the global struggle of World War II to the ideological quagmire of the Vietnam War, we are faced with a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the harsh consequences of war. These events are not just footnotes in history. They are pivotal moments that shape the world we live in today. The sacrifices made by soldiers, civilians, and entire nations left scars that can still be felt across the globe. But they also teach us about endurance, about the human capacity to rise from the ashes of devastation, and about the importance of understanding the past so that we can navigate the future more wisely. World War II and the Vietnam War each had their own unique causes, battles, and outcomes, but what they share is their undeniable impact on the course of human history. The lessons of these wars are not just academic. They are a guide for the decisions we make in our world today. The stories of courage, loss, and heroism are reminders of the sacrifices that must never be forgotten. They urge us to ask difficult questions about the cost of conflict, the price of ideology, and the ways in which we can prevent the horrors of war from repeating. As we honor the memory of those who fought and died, we must also carry forward their legacy by striving for peace, unity, and a more just world. History is not just a record of what happened in the past. It is a powerful tool that helps us make sense of the present and shape a better future. It's easy to look back and feel detached, but the reality is, these wars were not just events that happened back then. They are intertwined with our present struggles, ideologies, and global relationships. The stories of World War II and Vietnam remind us that we are the inheritors of a complex legacy, and it's our responsibility to learn from it. Let these stories of survival, suffering, and triumph teach us about the strength of the human will, and the importance of empathy, understanding, and diplomacy in our modern world. If you found this exploration of history insightful and thought-provoking, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who may find it meaningful, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. Your support helps us continue to bring you in-depth, engaging historical content. Together, we can ensure that these stories never fade from our collective memory, and that their lessons continue to resonate across generations. Join us as we continue our journey through history and uncover the stories that have shaped the present and will guide the future. So hit that subscribe button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation going. History is more than just something we learn about, it's something we live with, and it's up to us to make sure that its lessons shape our tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Make sure to tap the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Join us next time as we uncover more historical events that still impact our world today. Until then, keep questioning, stay curious, and remember, the past is always present in how we choose to shape the future.